Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 26th of September 2024, my birthday. Thank you so much to those who have been very generous in supporting the channel on my birthday, for my birthday, and with all your well-wishing. It is just another day in the history of the universe, but it is one that I think should be celebrated far and wide as I say that as legend of the multiverse. For those who know, you know. For those who don't, meh. Right, okay, let's get on with the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the description below. Some massive figures here to look at, and if you are pro-Ukrainian, to celebrate. 1,400 personnel lost is above the 1,300 kind of arbitrary threshold. I think is just super high. So 1,000 to 1,300 is what we've been seeing, and that's another day over that. That is pretty incredible there. So good news for the Ukrainians on that front. 10 tanks is also above the daily average. 44 troop-carrying AFVs has shot right up. That is easily double the daily average there. 71 artillery systems is a phenomenal number of artillery pieces lost. Wow. 7 anti-aircraft warfare systems is just an insanely high number there. I mean, normally you're lucky if you get 1 or 2. To get 7 in one day, I'd be interested to see what they are. 105 vehicles and fuel tanks. What is going on? 22 pieces of special equipment. So something has been happening over the last 24 hours, but actually I'd say over the last week, where we have seen just really significant increases across the board. And I was talking in my frontline update about how, how long can the Russians keep going? They are throwing everything in the kitchen sink at these places where they're at least having some success on the front line. Pokrovsk, Vuhledar, towards Kharkiv maybe, and even up in Pyshchane in the northeastern axis there. But I think this is certain indication that the Russians are pushing and pushing while they possibly can. It's interesting. Dell reached out to me today, who does the stats. So, Dell's Excel spreadsheet that I think is so useful. You can look at that. Anyone can access this. It is linked in my video all the time, and it's certainly my first video of the day. He said to me this morning, I keep thinking that the record-setting phases of this tragic war are over, but no, the madness continues. So there's a new 7-day moving average for artillery, previously set at 59.57. On day 864, 6th of July 2024, and today reaching a new high of 63.29. So the 7-day rolling average for artillery losses. So you see artillery losses, 74, I think, was that the record day? 74? Let's have a look. No, actually 81 is a record. We had 71 today, and 74 yesterday, 61 the day before, and you can keep going back. But you can look at the rolling average, 7 days, 63.29, 30-day rolling average, 37.5. Incredible numbers being posted in that category. New 7-day rolling average for drones, previously set at 75, is now 75.57, which suggests that the Russians are using just phenomenal numbers of drones at the moment. I don't think this is just attack drones either. So if you look at the drone numbers here, they are outdoing the number of drones we see on a daily basis being used, communicated by the General Staff. So the drone numbers, 67 today, 67, 115 the day before, and yet when you look at these sort of figures that are produced on these infographics here, oops, God, I'm going all over the place. Everything is on slow at the moment. I've got too much going on my computer. Anyway, when you look at these numbers, that's 78 Shahid drones were shot last night. But then tomorrow's figure will undoubtedly be much higher than that. And I'm sure it's because they are adding in, when they tot these figures up, they add in other drones. Although that one is in line with yesterday's figures. It's just, they're a bit all over the place because I think they have this weird cutoff time where the drones are still often in the air. Like, for example, this morning, Tim White said okay, there are 78 drones fired, 66 shot down, 8 more fell, 1 went back home, another is still in the air. So as they release these figures, the drone attacks are still going on. What that means is that these numbers don't always track with what they claim was a wave from the night before, and they're often higher, which means I think there's a lot of reconnaissance drones that get thrown into this, and maybe even Lancets that get taken out. What that means is not only are the Russians consistently attacking with Shahid type attack drones, one-way attack drones, but they are also flying, I think, more reconnaissance drones, and the Ukrainians are shooting those down. I say shooting them down, intercepting them with their own FPV drones. So I think that's worth considering as well. What are the data stuff? So we were looking at high numbers. That was drones. Dell said, and lastly, an equal daily high for special equipment at 22, matching the 22 previously on the 20th of August 2024. So thanks, Dell, for pointing. I love it when he points that out to me, because I can just quickly tell you guys, Dell, you are a service to humanity. Thank you. So yeah, a lot of special equipment being lost. And of course, that category is a bit vague. You're going to have excavators in there. You might have deminers. You might have all sorts of interesting bits of kit that could be included in that. So whatever that is, they are losing a lot of it. And 105 vehicles and fuel tanks is another record as well, which actually didn't mention there. Oddly, but that appears to be a record as well, a record daily high, 105. So really a record breaking day in a lot of categories, or close to, and an uptick in the combat asset losses compared to maybe a week ago. So Russians really taking a bloody nose, although as we can see by the maps, they are still making those important gains. Right. Okay, when we look at Andrew Perpetua's list, this is from yesterday. We have a fairly substantial artillery list there, which is, for his list, that's quite a lot. They don't always track, like I say, they don't really track particularly well with the claims from the General Staff, because I don't think visual evidence for them is as widespread on the socials. Yesterday, 74 was a high, not a record high, but it was a recent, that's a really substantial number of artillery pieces lost in a single day. And it is no surprise, perhaps, that there are a few more artillery pieces on the Russian losses there. Anyway, when we go to the Russians, combat asset losses go from there to there. So that's about a 2-to-1 ratio of Russian to Ukrainian losses. If we look at Ukrainian losses first, they have what is there of note? A few tanks destroyed and abandoned, three IFVs, some APCs, some MRAPs, one being captured again. That's a Kozak 7. Max Pros being taken out there. Nothing too significant there, just the usuals. Not a huge amount of civilian vehicles, actually, interestingly. They've lost quite a few of them lately. Now, for the Russians, we've got an air defense system, the Tor M2, taken out. I'd say taken out, damaged by an FPV drone. And then onto the artillery, we've got quite a range here. Mr. B's, Mr. S's, Gyatsint B, D20s, D30s, M46. It's a really old one there. Got quite a good range, but that is this is World War II stuff, really. Tanks, got 5 tanks, most of them, all but one, destroyed or abandoned. 2 of them tracked garden sheds. Bit of a range there. Infantry fighting vehicles, most of those destroyed. BMP2s, 1s, and BTRs. APC thrown in, and the rest are trucks, ATVs, and civilians. So there is an air defense system listed. It'd be interesting to see over the next couple of days what Andrew Perpetua produces in terms of air defense losses. It'd be interesting to see if that tracks with the 7 claimed to have been taken out in the last 24 hours by the Ukrainians. It's an insanely high number. Now, in terms of personnel losses, you might see this as a bit controversial for me to bring this guy in, and you might think it's me trying to make a cheap political point. Maybe it is. I'm so deeply worried about the political situation in the US with the what's being said, and we have a claim from someone in an incredibly important position about Ukrainian losses and what they're doing to replace those losses. Is this an important data point? This is going to be informing people. This is part of the information space. I think it's deeply, deeply, deeply freaking irresponsible what he said last night, and it was worse than the 2 days before, and I ranted my head off for 2 days, and he's done it to an even worse degree last night. I think it's reprehensible, but you know my political opinions there when it comes to this. Anyway, as Sarin says, Trump has reached a new level of mental decline. Okay, this is some of the stuff he said. Now, this is relevant to this video. I wouldn't normally do political stuff here, but he's making a claim here. So his claim is, and this is what he said, his words, Ukraine is gone. It's not Ukraine anymore. It's almost all destroyed. Quote, millions and millions of people died. So he's saying that millions and millions of people died. Whether that includes Russians, I don't know. Whether that is a case of Ukrainian troops and civilians, he's claiming millions have died. The best understanding we have at the moment is maybe, and Ukraine denied this the other day, but maybe 80,000 Ukrainian troops have died. They vehemently say that is overstated. I don't know. How many civilians, I don't know. But if you're talking millions and millions, it's just simply not true. Even if you add both sides up. But anyway, you could say that is disinformation. People are saying that he's just regurgitating Russian talking points more overtly now. Putin is no angel, but Biden and Harris stupidly allowed this war. Any bad deal with Putin is better than no deal. Ukraine should have agreed to the terms earlier and given up something. Ukraine, what do you have left after 3 years of terrible fighting? You will never be able to rebuild the cities and towns as they were. They were thousands of years old. I don't know that all of them were. I mean, Vuhledar is a mining town that's just a bunch of high-rises built in the middle of nowhere near a mine. So, okay. 3 years ago, you had a beautiful civilization, and now most of the country is gone. There is no heritage. Ukraine is running out of soldiers. So this is important to this video. Ukraine is running out of soldiers. Now, I would somewhat agree with that. There's definitely the case. Mainly because, not because they've had so many killed and wounded, although that is a terrible statistic, and yes, that's an issue, but actually largely because many people have left the country to evade going to war. And so there is a claim that maybe the country's population has gone from 44 million down to 28 million, maybe somewhere around that. That's a huge loss of people. But in terms of combat losses, they are huge, but they're not remotely this kind of level. Now, Ukraine is running out of soldiers, he says. They are using small children and old people. If Harris wins, more people will die, more cities will fall in Ukraine. If Trump wins, then he'll just give it to Russia. Are they using small children and old people? Well, the average age of the soldiers does seem to be higher than it should be. Are they using old people? I mean, the Russians are using some pretty old people. Are either side using small children? No, they're not. That is just a lie. Anyway, I find it really unconscionable and egregious. But there's a data point. Make of that what you will. Is that accurate? No, it's not. Why would he say that? Chris Owicki says Russian commanders are throwing away their troops in performative assaults to impress their superiors, according to the angry Russian mill blogger. His commentary highlights a persistent contributing factor to Russia's very high casualty figures. Russian commentators have repeatedly described the Russian army's pattern of institutionalized lying, including staged training, fake manpower figures, and false claims of having captured targets, which result in bloody attempts to make the claims real. So what they do often is make a claim to the superiors that this particular village has been captured, and then the superiors believe that, and then they start making plans around that, and then it turns out that, oh my goodness, it's not actually captured, and if they realize it's not captured, I'm done for, and so now I actually do have to capture it. And so I'm going to throw loads of people irresponsibly at this in a way that wouldn't have been necessary had I actually tried to take it and initially take it using sensible tactics. And it ends up becoming more expensive and bloody for the Russians in trying to post hoc prove that they've taken a particular settlement. Anyway, That's what that means. The ultra-nationalist journalist Vladislav Shurigin complained earlier this year that, quote, hundreds of Russian men were driven towards their slaughter so that the boss who reports the capture, who has already drilled a hole for the medal on his uniform, can cover his ass. Daniel Zenchikov, who appears to be blogging from the battlefield, complains on his Telegram channel of his personal experience under, quote, fat-faced degenerates who stupidly call themselves commanders and blame their own men for their own deaths. Quote, when the director Angenia died, our command first of all began to invent reasons why the deceased were to blame for their own deaths. Why weren't they wearing bulletproof vests? Asked the people who didn't give them bulletproof vests. They were playing on their phones and that's why they died. This is very similar to texting someone on Messenger. In the end, it all came down to a short line in an official document, quote, died while at a roadblock. And it didn't bother people that there can't be any roadblock where the enemy is so close and that you can start shouting at him if you want to. It's just that the commanders who sent people to hell with nothing really didn't want to be held responsible for their deaths. And at that time, the expensive whores liked to advertise the fact that the reservists were no further forward than the third line. I wish they were on the third line, or at least the second line. Of course, my friends were killed by the enemy, but to no lesser extent, they were killed by two fat-faced degenerates who foolishly called themselves commanders. And when they refused to go on the assault without any support, refused to be done meat, it was, we'll lock you up, you'll be reset to zero, that means executed, etc. Because the fat-faced degenerates didn't care about people, they only cared about their own fat asses and their bravura reports. When Sergeant and I were being picked up by transport from that hellhole that the battalion commander had driven us into, who had promised to go with us till the very end, but at the last moment, out of habit, he backed out. The irritated battalion commander asked us only one question, quote, what happened to you that you need to go to the hospital? Those who did not go to the hospital would later be arrested, not for refusing to fight. They didn't refuse. They refused to go to certain death to fortified enemy positions without the slightest support. They would be promised that they would not be sent one way again. In a little over 24 hours, they would be sent to attack a well-fortified enemy position without the slightest chance of success. For more than 20 men, it would be the final assault. When the relatives of the dead would call the commander, hoping to find out something about their missing relatives, he would tell them only, why are you calling me? Who gave you my number? Never call here again. And that's if you omit the swearing. And the battalion commander continued to serve because he was a good man. If people died, it means he was trying. Therefore, no matter what the dear whores are saying now about how it's their own fault, and I was told here, and this can't be, and all the commanders are heroes, and there's a commander who's been decorated, and so on, we know it can be something else. That even the presence of awards does not mean that a person is an honest and fair commander. Okay, so translations aside and whatnot, that is yes, it's an anecdote, but it's a sort of anecdote that we have seen so many times. These are your Russian mill bloggers who are these are the people who are wanting Russia to have resounding success in Ukraine. And when they're being critical, it's because the Russians aren't doing a good enough job at genocide or at winning the war. So these kind of criticisms, I think, do need to be taken seriously because they are coming from the very Russian people themselves. Okay, moving on. We have OSINT Technical saying Donetsk Oblast, a Ukrainian drone spotted a parked Russian convoy roughly 30 kilometers behind the front. A Ukrainian M142 HIMARS promptly launched a salvo of M30 and M31 Gimlers rockets covering the Russian convoy in hundreds of D-Pick'em submunitions. That's how important D-Pick'ems are. Really interesting bit of footage. I probably can't show you this, but you've got an awful lot of vehicles here. In fact, I think at some point where you can see the submunitions going off there, scattering around those vehicles. Then another explosion happens over here, and then another, I think, submunition, another cluster of munition goes off. There you go. So actually, and there are vehicles in between those squares as well there, as you can see. So at least 6 vehicles, possibly more, getting absolutely hammered by HIMARS there. And there's as I say, a big explosion back there. I don't know if that's one of the vehicles, but also you can see there are different angles in this. I won't show it to you because I'll probably get in trouble, but there are different angles of that from different drones, I think, doing reconnaissance there, and that looked like a fairly decent bit of targeting. And there were Lots of people, I think, running around from some of those trucks that I think are the vehicles on the right. And obviously with those kind of submunitions, that's going to be particularly problematic for them. Okay, interesting here. So shoot and scoot equals death by drone, says CJ. So CJ's associated with the Tochny crew, and he's one a bit like Andrew Perpetua, and actually is someone you should listen to because I think he's still serving artillery. Saying that shoot and scoot, which is where you fire, and then HIMARS is a great example of shoot and scoot. That's the sort of thing you can do more easily because you're much further back from the line. So you fire those off, and then you go and hide the HIMARS. The problem is when you've got reconnaissance much closer to contact lines, so say artillery range, if you do shoot and scoot, say with an Archer or a self-propelled gun, any kind of self-propelled gun, right? You fire off your round or rounds. Counter battery fire gives you about 3 minutes to do that before you want to be starting to get out of dodge. The idea is then you drive off somewhere else and you're not going to be hit by counter battery fire because that used to be the main way of getting destroyed as artillery. So you'd fire that off, they'd track where your projectile was coming from, and then they'd hit you back with counter battery fire. But that's not really what happens now. Counter battery fire is either FPV drones hitting you, or it's reconnaissance spotting where you are and bringing in something else, like either an Iskander or artillery or MLRS or whatever, or FPV drones, right? And as a result, if you are artillery, when you're on the move is where you are most easily spotted by FPV drones and reconnaissance drones. In other words, rather than firing and getting out of dodge, and that's the way of staying the safest, actually, the Russians don't have counter-battery radars enough. They complain about this. This has been an issue throughout the war where it's either been degraded or they just don't have it. And so, therefore, you can hide your artillery. As long as you hide it really well, you fire off your stuff. They're not working out where it's coming from, and you're not moving, and that camouflage is what keeps you safe. So, but if you were to fire that all off and then move, you're more likely to be spotted because you're moving, you're driving along roads, you can be seen, or across whatever terrain, you can be seen by reconnaissance drones and FPV drones, you get taken out. So CJ here says shoot and scoot equals death by drones. Somewhere in Ukraine, a Russian Tu-S19 runs for its life from a Ukrainian FPVs and ISR, so that's intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, after conducting a hip shoot. These unplanned missions are easy to spot and make SPG, self-propelled guns, vulnerable to air attack. Digging in and camouflage is now a better option. And I know this is an argument, some people had it in my threads, but it seems to now be something of received wisdom from those who have been analysing this enough that shoot and scoot is too dangerous. There are drones everywhere and you get spotted. So the idea is that if that was just sitting in trees firing off its ordnance, then it's less likely to be spotted. There isn't counter battery fire and it has a greater chance of surviving. Let me know what you think. Right, okay, last night. So as mentioned, 78 Shaheeds sent off. A pretty good interception rate, 66. Plus 8 that were lost due to electronic warfare. 1 returned to Russia. Again, probably spoofing electronic warfare. So that's 75 out of 78. And then Tim White says another one was actually still in the air. So maybe 76 out of 78. So just the 2 or 3 drones may well have reached their targets. All 4 KH-59-69 cruise missiles were shot down. 0 out of 2 unknown type missiles were shot down. So none of those. And we are hearing, I presume this is after these stats were produced, but it might also include those 2 unknown type of missiles. We are hearing that Ukraine is being hit with Kinzhals. These are hypersonic missiles, the ones that, I mean, they are called into question as to how capable they are and how hypersonic they are, but nonetheless, they are going to be one of the most difficult missiles for the Ukrainians to shoot down. Russia has been attacking Ukraine with Kinzhals. I was contacted by Zhenya this morning saying Starokonstantiniv is under attack by these Kinzhals. That is the air base in Khmelnytsky, quite far over to the west of Ukraine. That is almost certainly going to have something to do with F-16s. There are only a certain number of places where F-16s are usable due to the demands of the air intake of the plane and needing certain runways, etc., etc. But he's like, yeah, MiG-31Ks are still in the air. He was saying so. This morning could well be. Although he does say that F-16s are sometimes taking off from roads and not from airfields, and not in this region. So actually, it was thought that was going to be. Starokonstantinov has for some time been absolutely hammered by the Russians because they have been trying to. Well, primarily because it's where the airframes that take off with the Storm Shadows and Scalps leave from. So that's where they are generally thought to have been housed. And the Russians have given it special attention, and it's thought that the F-16s would operate from there as well. But actually, this could be quite clever if they are able to operate the F-16s from carefully manicured roads. So I've driven on some of those roads are purposefully very straight and flat, so you can take off from there. Some of their longer kind of dual carriageway roads. That would solve the problem of only having certain air bases that the Russians would know about that you could fly F-16s from. Anyway, whatever. This morning, Starokonstantinov has been targeted by F-16. Shut up, Pierce. By Kinzhaus. So that is something to be aware of, and there may be some more news. Although I say that, it's the sort of place that you won't hear news from. You won't hear battle damage assessments coming out of Starokonstantinov because that is like OPSEC Central. For KH-5969, those missiles that were shot down were in Odessa by all accounts. So that's good news that they were taken out. Now, Christopher Miller from the FT says Russia has sent waves of suicide drones and attacked Kiev. So that's this morning. Explosions in Kiev as well. That was going on this morning. For the last 5 hours, explosions reverberating. He said in the middle of the night last night, 4 in the morning, reverberating across the city with Ukrainian air defense clearly audible. The city hasn't got much sleep tonight. Well, with all of these waves of drones happening every single night, it must be horrible. Ukrainians must be exhausted. They're not getting a lot of sleep. That belittles the seriousness of this. Like, oh, poor Ukrainians not getting a lot of sleep. Yeah. 2.5 years into war and getting ground down psychologically by these kind of attacks and having air raids go off every night and explosions happen around you, it's going to play with your psyche for sure. Now, to make matters worse, according to Energoatom, the atomic agency from Ukraine, on the night of September the 25th, last night, a Russian drone flew at a critically low altitude near the Rivne nuclear power plant, continuing the threat to Ukraine's nuclear safety. This has been a big worry recently. I haven't really reported on it, but there have been these analysts and news outlets sort of talking about the potential threats, actual threats. Well, I say actual, the perceived threat at the moment that people are feeling to the Ukrainian nuclear energy sector, that the Russians really are thinking about hitting their nuclear energy plants. Energoatom has reported these incidents to relevant authorities, emphasizing the importance of adhering to nuclear and radiation safety principles. We shall see. At least 4 Shahid kamikaze drones entered Belarus overnight, with one crossing the border from Russia. First drone entered Belarus around 12:13 at night near Lyubech and returned to Ukraine 30 minutes later. Subsequent drones, so on and so forth. You get all the details there. Throughout the night, 2 fighter jets were on standby over southeastern Belarus, with the first taking off from an airport in there at 12:30 and the second at 2:50 in the morning. So Russians again maybe intentionally using Belarusian airspace there in order to protect where their drones are, or maybe it just gives them a better trajectory, keeps the Ukrainians thinking in terms of where those drones might be flying to, and it's how Russia is somewhat co-opting Belarus into the war. In Zaporizhia, police have released a video of an attack from last night on, I'll pause that just in case it's anything dodgy, last night by Russia. So Zaporizhia city, it's the third day in a row that they've hit the city, and increasing proof that the Kremlin is openly targeting civilians. 7 people injured this time as an apartment building and business were struck. Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia, Mahanets, Nikopol, these places are routinely hammered, and it's the civilians who appear to be targeted. Russia, as we'll see soon again with some more evidence of war crimes, Russia are just not the good guys in this. And that's why I get super frustrated when one of the most powerful people in the world potentially is advocating for like a peace that's going to suit Russia, is talking about how Ukraine are at fault and then the US are at fault for this war. And meanwhile, Russia is going around committing war crimes left, right and centre. It drives me nuts. Unexploded FOB 500 aerial bomb in Sumy. So another example of Russian ordnance. Looks like it's going close to a bridge there. We know, I forgot to report that in my frontline update on Pokrovsk, that they're hitting bridges out of Pokrovsk. So it's really making it difficult for civilians to get out of Pokrovsk, let alone the military. Right, there are onto other bits and pieces. Good and bad news. We have progress in the Kursk region and the road to Lugov, so that's further north. So the Ukrainians pushing further north, but the Russians are seriously pressing in the east, and I showed you that on my frontline update this morning. And then we have Vovchansk being hit by, this is the aggregates plant where the Russians have pulled out from. That is... the Ukrainians have taken that back off the Russians, and the Russians are kind of saying, well, if we can't have it, you can't have it. And they've started absolutely hammering that with, I mean, it had been hammered before from both sides, actually, to be honest. When the Russians were holed up in there, the Ukrainians were hitting that with their own guided glide bombs, and now it's been absolutely slammed by these huge Russian guided glide bombs. We have a situation in Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. So this is Myrnohrad here. Pokrovsk is just to the left over here. We have the front lines where the Russians are at the moment are pretty much where the Ukrainian main fortifications are, their trenches are. This is a critical moment. If the Russians are able to overcome those trenches, then there ain't much left before Myrnohrad and Pokrovsk. So it really is critical in that neck of the woods. And moving on, we have actually staying on Pokrovsk, really. Ukraine may lose half of its steel production if Pokrovsk is occupied. The figures will drop to 2 to 3 million tons per year. This is reported by the president of Ukremetallurgprom. According to him, Pokrovsk is the only coking coal mine controlled by Ukraine. The loss of the town could lead to a shortage of such coal. This is incredibly important economically for Ukraine, and might give you an indication of why Russia want these places so much. And here we have, talk about those war crimes as there was. Ukrainian soldier finds evidence of war crimes on camera stolen by Russian invaders. The camera contains photos of a family from a Ukrainian village that was occupied by Russians for a month, as well as photos of Russian soldiers themselves and evidence of their war crimes. One video shows a line of civilians, including children, being led away with their hands and eyes tied. Russians. And then I reported on this previously. It seems to be happening again. So I think this is as a result of the same river. So the same river that comes through, as you know, the Glushkovo district comes down by Kursk and into the kind of river system in Ukraine. It was heavily polluted, and there were serious worries that was going to go all the way down to Kyiv, actually, and Dnipro River. Almost 30 tons of dead fish have been collected in Chernihiv region from the Seym and Desna rivers. Earlier, it was reported that the rivers were polluted as a result of sugar molasses discharge from a plant in Russia's Kursk region. According to environmentalists, the amount of damage to the environment is currently over $8 million. Absolutely horrible. The environmental damage being done by this war, the ecocide taking place is heartbreaking in just another way. Yet another heartbreaking outcome to this war. It drives me mad, and yet people are kind of calling on it being Ukraine's fault. They're calling on Ukraine to rush to negotiations to appease Putin, and yet, I'm going to start ranting, so I won't. But it's my birthday, and I shouldn't be this angry. But hey, it's my birthday, and I can cry if I want to, cry with pain and angst at the plight of the Ukrainians. Anyway, just before I leave y'all, I want to say a big thank you to a few people. As ever, thanks to Mark Bizcu, who is a total ledge. Andres Erdviks, just long overdue thanks to people. Mark Beaumont, Alex Grammersdorf, Axel Grammersdorf, I always get that wrong. Anthony Dzianowski, I'm going to butcher these names, Andre Katusa, Stephen Churchill, and V.I. Pomeroy. Thank you, or V.L. Pomeroy, who knows? You know Pomeroy. No, thank you. Thank you all so much for your support of the channel and for your well-wishing for me today. But we need to well-wish for those in Ukraine who are having it hard. That's animal and human alike. Take care, everybody. Speak soon.